This is Dr. Warren Vander Hill interviewing Dr. Earl Conn, Emeritus, Dean of the College of Communication, Information, and Media, former department head in journalism and professor of journalism for the Ball State History Project, October 4th, 2004. Earl, first I want to thank you for agreeing to do this, and I think it's an important part of the archival holdings of Ball State University. As a result, I'd like to ask if you tell me just a little bit about your educational background before you came to Ball State. Do that in as much detail. I know in your case it's a rather interesting story.
Well, educational background going back to...
We'll start with college.
Okay, I went to, when I got out of I was in the Navy at the end of World War II. It all started on a small station in wherever that guy is.
Yeah, right.
And I worked at, I grew up in Marion, and I worked as a buffer on Crosley cars. Did you know they make Crosley cars in Marion?
I knew of Crosley cars.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well, they assembled them in Marion. One of the places
Yeah.
they assembled them. I then came over to visit a friend who had enrolled at Ball State in the at the end of the fall quarter in what was it then? 46, I guess. And on a spot of a dime, decided to enroll in college. I had really no intention of going to college, but there was a GI Bill of which I was aware, and so I just made a decision to do that. So I went to Ball State for 1 year and 2 quarters. I probably was an English major, I guess. Apropos to that, you'll appreciate this. I had Charlie Cardpack Van Cleve in an English course, and we had an exam on the Scarlet Letter, and the only question I got, I think 98, the only question I missed on the test was, what does the letter A stand for?
Really?
Yeah. And I answered it, angel.
Great story. That is great.
Yeah. So a friend of mine, gotten to know here, was transferring to Kentucky, University of Kentucky, to study whatever it was. And of course, Ball State had practically no journalism at that time, maybe 3 courses. So I, again, sort of on a whim, agreed to transfer with him to Kentucky. So I finished at Kentucky with a journalism degree in 1950.
The golden age of Kentucky
The
basketball.
golden age and football.
Yeah, right, that's right.
George Blanda,
Yeah, right.
Vito Babe Perot.
Yeah, right, I remember.
Yeah. I was sports editor of the both the yearbook and the newspaper in my senior year.
Did you ever get to interview Adolph Rupp?
No, I didn't. I'm not even sure I ever talked to him.
Okay.
And of course, Bear Bryant was the football coach.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know that I ever really talked to Bryant either.
Yeah.
I probably did once when we took a picture of the team.
Right.
But in any case, so then I went to work for, it was United Press at that time. It had not merged with International News Service in Louisville. And because my Navy career at the end of World War II had been so brief, I joined an Air Force Reserve unit, which immediately got called to active duty in the Korean War. So that, then went back to Marion, worked on the newspaper for a while. My wife was teaching. I was working nights on a morning paper. We never saw each other. So she said, why don't you go into teaching? So I said, okay. That's another great story about a dear soul at what was called Marion College, who accommodated me beyond anything he should ever have done. So my first education course was student teaching. My first education course was student teaching.
Was that the period in your life when you covered the now famous to people like me game where James Dean played?
Yeah. It was. Well, Dean was before that.
Okay.
Dean was in 49, but I was working summers and vacations at the Marion paper, and I actually covered the sectional, the famous, his last sectional. But in any case, So then I went into teaching, taught at Somerset, which no longer exists, for 3 years, Richmond High School for a year, and at that point, Lou Engelhardt had gotten permission to add another faculty member at Ball State. I was talking to the old placement guy, Charles McNaughton.
Yeah, but not, yeah.
And his memory's probably better than mine, even though he's 99. He says that he pulled my name out of the file and recommended me to Engelhardt, and that's probably what actually happened. The way I remembered it was Engelhardt and I got to know each other. That makes a difference. So I came up and probably told you this story, interviewed Emmons, or Emmons interviewed me.
Yeah.
Paul Royalty was head of English. And my last Emmons did the perfunctory interview, I'm sure. Said, do you have any questions? And I said, yeah, well, I have one. I'm supposed to go back to Richmond High School. This was in July or something. So if I'm not going to go back, I need to let them know as quickly as I can. He said, well, we'll let you know right away. So I drove to Richmond from there. Telephone was ringing when I walked in the door. And Chris said, it's John Emmons. And he said, well, we're offering you the job. And then he said, well, I'm sure with a sarcastic mouth, is this fast enough?
Sounds like Emmons.
Yeah. So I came to Ball State after a year at Richmond. And in the meantime, I'd finished a master's degree at Ball State in history, and which I very much enjoy.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't called history. It was
Right.
probably called social science education,
yeah.
or
Right.
something like that. Then it was obvious if I was ever going to go anywhere, I needed to work on a doctorate. So I scouted out a number of programs and eventually settled on IU, and went there and began to take courses periodically. And then I got a year's leave of absence and went to IU and finished the coursework. And I think I continued. I was always sort of going to IU and teaching a little bit and, you know, that sort of thing. And then back to Ball State, and while I was at Ball State then, finished the dissertation in 72? No, probably 70 or 70.
So it was a university by then?
University,
Yeah.
Ball State?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, when I first, well, I skipped over a period there. I left Ball State in the 60s to go down to be the full-time editor of Quaker Life. I'd been doing that 2 years part-time. Then when I came back to Ball State in 64, I actually went into public information for a year. And that was the year that Ball State became a university. 64, 65.
Did you, I mean, this is a kind of tricky question because you were sort of in and out of here and working on a degree, but I'd like you to focus a little bit on what were your expectations of the role of a faculty member?
Well, I didn't have the traditional academic program.
Right.
You know, you very clear you want to be a college teacher,
Yeah,
you go
yeah.
someplace and get a PhD. And so, in all honesty, I don't think I could say that I had, my guess would be that I would not have had the expectations typical faculty member might have had. I very much, and I think professors do today, very much enjoyed the teaching schedule. Now, if you haven't been a high school teacher, you can't appreciate that. But if you've been a high school teacher, which I was for 4 years, and taught 7 classes a day, and had the school play and the school newspaper, and you know, take tickets to the basketball games and that sort of thing, you can't appreciate what what would you call it? A more leisurely pace.
Well, you look back
academic life.
you look back on high school teaching and wonder how you did all that stuff.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So the biggest pleasure was the more relaxed approach you took to the position.
Okay. Why'd you stay?
Well, in all honesty, I don't know that it had a lot to do with Ball State. I think it had more to do with family and kids and what have you. Now, I always enjoyed Ball State, and I did have a couple of overtures from other schools that expressed a little interest. Whether they would have gone anywhere or not is another matter. But I was perfectly satisfied with Ball State, always have been. And why leave? I mean, this was a fine place to teach. I enjoyed it. I fit in fairly well. I was modestly successful. I did a lot of things I like to do. I was not an unhappy camper.
Okay. In what ways did Ball State change during the time you were a faculty member and administrator?
Yeah. See, actually, I bring a longer perspective than that, because I don't know whether you realize this or not, I've been associated with Ball State for 7 decades now.
Right.
The
A lot of change.
Yeah, 40s as a student,
Yeah.
and then the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and zeros. This is the first fall semester I haven't taught in 50 years. So, well, that's not true. I had a year's leave of absence.
Yeah, right.
Even though I think maybe I may have taught a night course then. I believe I did. But in any case, so I've got a lot of miles
Right.
at Ball State.
And you saw a lot of change.
Yeah. Yes and no.
Okay.
I think in certain ways the place has changed. In certain other ways it really hasn't changed.
Okay. Well, comment on that.
I think if one were to have been here as I first was in the winter quarter of 46, 47, and now you're here in 2004, so what's that? That's 54 or 58 years. In 58 years, obviously, the campus physically has changed tremendously.
Right.
It is no longer a teacher's college, it's a university. It's no longer a place primarily for education majors. They are what, 15% or something like that these days. So in very important ways, the faculty is bigger and stronger and more typical of research university faculties. In many significant ways, Ball State has changed tremendously. In another way, and it's hard to put your finger on it, but in another way, I think a faculty member from 1946 could come into Ball State and in one way at least, which is hard to put your finger on, be quite comfortable.
Okay.
And I'm saying, admittedly, it's difficult to put your finger on it. It's difficult to, and maybe it's difficult to articulate because, in fact, it's less true than I think. I don't know. But despite the headlines in the Daily News of unhappy conservative students, too,
Right.
it's always been, and I think still is, essentially a friendly, accepting campus. Accepting in this, not in the sense of the Bush haters and the Kerry haters, that's hardly accepting, but in the sense of I guess maybe I've never really thought about it, but I guess in a sense it represents Midwestern values.
Okay.
Reasonably open, sort of conservative, but willing on most matters to kind of accept people. Not everything, but on most matters, willing to accept people, kind of a live and let live, in a sense. None of these can be carried to the extremes, of course. And friendly. I think it still remains a friendly. I walk across the campus, as I just did, and students will say hello to me. Young girls will smile, which I always appreciate. Say hello.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's just because of gray hair, and you know, I don't know.
They think of your grandfather.
But yeah, they think I'm their grandfather or something. But in that sense, and that's maybe more important than we realize.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. Let me try this on you. I go back to your faculty member who was here in '46 and your faculty member who's here in 2004. I think one of the things that those people would have in common is that to be a faculty member here kind of carries with it that you are pretty accessible to students.
Well, yes, that would certainly be part of it.
And for the friendly part of that,
Yeah.
I would go with. I think the vast majority of faculty here, because we are overwhelmingly an undergraduate institution, and really always have been, and probably always will be, that faculty here remain pretty much open door.
Yeah.
And I'd even go beyond and say they're very willing to help students.
Yeah.
I mean, I think back on years I've been here, and certainly yours, that the hallmark of a faculty member here is that he or she is willing to almost, I'd say, go the extra mile to try to help students out.
Yeah, I think there are, another way to put it perhaps, and obviously there are always exceptions to the rule, there aren't an overly large number of big egos, of people who have to be glorified because of their faculty status. And most of them are, again, we're talking about generalities, most of them are, I use the word accepting, and in that I would include friendly, open door, willing to help students if they possibly can. I know that sometimes, of course, I've had a lot of students over the years, and every now and then one of my kids will say that they talked to so-and-so who was a student of mine, and maybe half the time the person would say something like, "Boy, your dad was tough." I was never tough. Never.
Yeah.
And I'm always a little taken back by that. But anyhow, yeah, that's the way I would see it. Now, obviously, there are exceptions. There are the dullards, and there are the ego, the persons whose egos go through the ceiling, but they're not in the majority.
I would agree. Reflect back on the period in the early '80s when, in terms of the way we evaluate individual faculty, there were really significant changes.
Yeah.
I mean, you came to a university, I came to a university where we had pretty much automatic tenure, pretty much automatic promotion, pretty much, well, we had across-the-board salary increases.
Mm-hmm.
And that all changed when Jim Cook was provost for 4 years or so in the early 1980s. When you look back on that period and where that has come to now, where these kinds of changes are really part of the fabric of the lives of faculty here, do you see that in the university and more perhaps specifically in the journalism department as a sea change in the institution?
Well, I think it was a change. I don't think, however, that my response would be typical. My response would be I wasn't upset about that. I think it was probably inevitable, just when, and that it was more in keeping with what, as far as I knew, good progressive campuses tried to do, and it might, whether it would probably ultimately hurt me, I suppose, because I was not a great researcher. I did some, but that was not my bag. I remember journalism was having some kind of a tiff with Cook. I don't remember what it was. Several of us went over to meet with him at one point. And the discussion got around to the relationship between teaching, service, and research. And I made some probably stupid comment about, well, it wasn't stupid for the times because I think it reflected a lot of truth. I said something like, well, you know, in journalism, because of our relationship to the profession, for some of us at least, it would not be an exception to say that 75% of our time is given to service. And Cook just about fell off his chair.
Yeah, Ray would.
What?
Yeah, right.
We can't have that.
Yeah.
We're not paid by the Indianapolis Star. You know, we're not a service institution. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Well, you know, he
Yeah.
certainly had his point.
Yeah.
But at least for some of us, who were very much in service at that time. Far more, I think, than today, although I could be corrected on that. So I wasn't. I was not personally upset about it. I thought it was probably inevitable. Thought it was probably ultimately good. And you know, let's carry on and see what happens. Now, I don't think that may not have. I suspect that was not the majority opinion.
Right. I would agree at that time. Yeah. But it's had a dramatic effect on the life of faculty
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
since that time.
Right.
An important part of your life, and a little bit of mine, is of course that I would refer to you and to Dr. Joe Mashevitz as really the founding fathers of the College of Communication, Information, and Media, since
Mm-hmm.
you're the ones who came to me when I was provost and said, let's talk about having a school, and then later, why not
Right.
have a college? Why do you think that was so important to Ball State at that juncture in its history?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, and I don't think John Stone would disagree with this, what did he have, 26 departments or something like that?
Far too many.
Yeah, far too many. It was 20-something,
Yeah.
whatever it was. And to my knowledge, at least to me, he never expressed any displeasure whatsoever with our withdrawing and
Right.
creating a new college. Well, of course, he's a nice person.
Right. Yeah.
Very considerate and helpful
Right.
dean, and you can say a lot of good things about him to John State. But in any case, and maybe other departments felt the same way. I really don't know. But if there was a sort of a coming together of these communications departments, let's call them, let's say communications, as you know, can mean anything. But it wasn't going to happen in that college.
Right.
And that would be one reason. The second would be external. The schools across the country that really are perceived to be strong programs were self-standing units.
Right.
And that was never going to happen here. I mean, I don't know what you think, but my theory is that strong academic programs, the reputation of strong academic programs goes on for years long after the reputation has been lost. And I think name a couple of schools with which I have some familiarity that probably still are perceived to be exceptionally strong schools and haven't been for decades. On the other hand, it's very difficult to build a reputation. I mean, Ball State would be a case in point, trying to establish itself.
Sure.
It's extremely difficult. Well, the shortcut in journalism or TCOM or anything else is to be a self-standing unit. And we knew, because of studies that I'd done of other schools across the country, that if we formed a unit, we would, in the blink of an eye, be one of the giants. Now, that doesn't necessarily make it good,
Right.
But nevertheless, we would be
big.
We would be big. And if, in fact, when we were formed, we immediately became the 7th largest school of mass media, whatever you want to call them, in the nation. So if we were ever going to sort of leapfrog, fast forward, ratchet up, whatever analogy you want to use, the programs here, that was about the only way to do it.
Well, as you look back on that, you know, and I'll use the plural here, we, you, me, you as dean, me as provost, do you regard that as one of the best things that happened to Ball State?
Oh, I think so. I don't think there's any question about it.
I do.
Yeah, I think it was, I don't know that I probably knew more about it than anybody, but I don't even think I realized what that could really mean for Ball State.
Well, on the other hand, I think if it hadn't been done at that time, I don't think it could have done it today. And I think that those disciplines would have been more and more buried in the College of Sciences and Humanities and never really received their just due.
And you may or may not remember that actually we delayed it a year.
Yeah, right.
Because Worthen made those, 17 faculty cuts or whatever they were.
Yeah.
And I think I came to you and said, I don't think this is a good time to do this. And I think it was the right decision. And we held off a year, and the thing sailed through.
Yeah, no question about that. Well, you may have already answered this, but when you think of the changes that have occurred during your long period of time of service at Ball State, do you think the changes have been largely positive or negative?
Oh, yeah. No, I think they've definitely been positive. There may have been a negative glitch somewhere along them, no doubt there were. Several probably, but part of that may be, and I don't know what the other people say, but part of that may be my personality. I don't easily get upset with things.
True.
And I kind of take the long-term view, and believing that ultimately things kind of work out and you move forward. And, well, I think definitely, I think Ball State was a very good teachers' college, and it's on its way to becoming a very good university. We're not there yet, obviously, but I think I was on that committee that agreed to, whatever it was, for 96 or 7 to raise the academic requirements.
Right, yeah.
And we took a couple of hits with some low enrollments and what have you, but I think it was definitely a good step to take.
Yeah, I agree.
And no, I think definitely positive.
Yeah, I would agree. Who are some of the people during your career here who had special impact on you, and that can be for good or ill?
Well, I've never forgotten, it's a long list,
Yeah,
probably
right.
don't have time for it. But I certainly remember Robert LaFollette.
Right.
I never will forget the first time, you probably heard the story many times. The first time I would have been in probably the winter quarter of 1947. I was in his beginning, whatever it was, class, and all those World War II veterans, and big classes. I don't know how many of us there were, 45, maybe, something like that. And you went over to the gym and filled out a card, and every professor then had your card. And LaFollette had those 45 cards or whatever it was. And he would go, Warren Vander Hill, here. Oh, Earl Conn, here. Okay. And then at the end of the class, he said, now let me be sure I've got this right. And went around and memorized everybody's name. I mean, it was, just blew me away. Another, and this was actually was important. Another LaFollette story. I took a class called Representative Americans.
Oh, yeah, I taught that at one point.
Did you?
Yeah. It's kind of like great biographies.
Yes.
Yeah, I did that.
And so we, you studied your American, and then you reported.
Sure.
And I remember sitting beside him when the guy reported on Benjamin Franklin. And I don't remember how much time we had. Maybe, well, I don't honestly remember, maybe 30 minutes, possibly. And LaFollette had a little note card on which he'd write something down. I was sitting next to him. The guy was reporting on Franklin. If it was 30 minutes, he wrote 23 minutes and Ben is still in the print shop. Whatever it was. But, of course, that would be the danger, you know. But before you made your presentation, you sent LaFollette a draft, and then you met with him. I don't think I've ever told you the story. So I did. It was on a Saturday morning. I was working at the Marion newspaper. I took FDR. And actually, I have a note from Eleanor Roosevelt because Chris sent what I wrote to Eleanor Roosevelt, and she sent back a nice little note. But in any case, LaFollette started going through it. Saying, well, Mr. Conn, here on page 2, such and so, you want to change that. Here, page 7, you have to do some more on this. And after he did that 4 or 5 times, I stopped him and said, Dr. LaFollette, there's something you don't understand. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, I'm a journalist. We write on deadlines. Journalists don't change things. And he said, Mr. Conn, there's something you don't understand. What's that? You're going to change things. Well, that was a valuable lesson because I wasn't being a smart aleck. When I said that, I said it sincerely. But that was a very valuable lesson. And now I teach workshops called Good Writing is Good Editing. And if there's anything I believe about writing, it is only as good as the editing. So that was a very valuable lesson. And of course, Engelhardt had a lot of influence. I worked with him for decades, and I've often thought what will be said when Engelhardt dies, assuming I'm still alive, which may not be true.
Yeah, right.
He's got good genes.
I know, he just keeps tottering along.
Yeah, it just keeps going along. But I've often thought about that because there's probably, I've never known a person so singularly devoted to a single cause as he is. And there's another political term which I think describes him, which is now suddenly escaping me. What was William Jennings Bryan? He was the great commoner, but he was also, how would you describe his political?
Populist.
Populist, yeah. That's not quite it. There's another term that means, that's used synonymously, I think, with populist. I can't think of what it is.
I can't either.
But that describes Engelhardt. Unshakable belief in the common man.
Yeah, I agree. And he's we the people to a fault.
We the people to a fault, yes, right. So he certainly had a great influence. And then there's a long, long list of other faculty members that I remember Bill Sutton. I shared an office complex with him in the English department. I never saw anybody like it in my life. He would give an exam, march back to his office, and sit down and grade the exam.
Yeah, those are American originals.
Yeah.
People like that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your involvement in the university outside of the department, later the college. What other kinds of things have been of interest to you?
Well, I remember I served on one of the first appeals committees. That was an experience. When Ball State was just beginning the governance concept. I ultimately became chairman of the University Senate. Did I do that? I can't remember whether I did 1 or 2 years.
Probably 2, at least everybody.
I think everybody, I think I did it for 2 years.
Unless you're an abysmal failure, you just get to do it a second time.
And that was one of the times when we were rewriting the faculty handbook.
Right.
And so I've had quite a bit of experience in things like that. And then beyond the university itself is this whole service concept
Yeah.
of, at least the way I saw it, if you weren't affiliated with the industry in a very significant way, you were just out of step.
Right.
And so there was a lot of that.
Talk some about your involvement in the community. What kinds of things have interested you
Mm-hmm.
as far as what I call Muncie and the larger community?
Yeah. Well, I've of course been involved in the church forever, and was the presiding clerk for 7 years, I think, or something like that. Joseph Goddard was the first clerk of Friends in Muncie, and he served for 50 years. And his successor, Susan Sturdivant, served for 24 years. And it was her great lament that she couldn't serve at least half as long as Joseph Goddard did. So, interestingly enough, Joseph Goddard wrote a biography, which is down in the church. And let's say it has 110 pages. I don't really remember. Not very long. 2 pages deal with his 50 years in Muncie. The other 108 pages deal with growing up and being quartermaster for Ulysses S. Grant in the Western campaign. I always thought that was so interesting. But so I had a lot of, and then I've served on not widely, but church. I haven't been involved in the service clubs. Never had any particular interest in that. I was involved in politics for a while, and
Done some human rights stuff.
human rights stuff, and a lot of writing, stuff like that.
What's your perspective on the role of the faculty at Ball State?
Well, that would probably, the service thing is probably one thing that would be among the sea changes. At one point, faculty, many, if not most, faculty, I think, were very much involved in community activities, and while some are today, proportionately, I think it would be much less. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so.
Well, do you say that because you've experienced this and watched it happen, both as a faculty and an administrator, that, again, some of that's due to what faculty are now required to do?
Well, I think some of it certainly would be. And I think it also, it's part of the same package. As new faculty come in, they are aware of what the expectations are, and they have nothing to do with service, as we used to define community service. Or very little, at least, if not nothing.
Well, if you do it, you don't get any credit for it.
You don't get any credit for it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that would certainly be a change. Yeah.
How do you view the relationship between town and gown? Do you think that's changed?
I would almost be inclined to say it hasn't.
Okay.
I don't have any hard data to support that, but I think from what I know, many townspeople still have no association with Ball State. They hesitate to come to the campus. First of all, you can't find
Right, the place to
can't
park.
find a place to park, and they're a little leery of it. And the only, I haven't really thought it through, but my first reaction would be the only significant difference would be less faculty participation in the community. If that in fact is true, and I think it's true.
I think it's true.
Yeah, I think it's true. But I think the kind of view that Ball State has of the community and the kind of view the community has of Ball State really hasn't changed. Now, this is not supporting data, but it is perhaps illustrative. If you remember when the Virginia researchers came back,
Yeah, sure.
50 years after
Yeah.
the Caplows
Ted
were
Caplow, yeah.
back, I thought the most significant thing they found out was when they asked the question of Muncie citizens, how do you spend your spare time? And it had not changed in 50 years. It was visit with the family.
Yeah, what they found on that point, I think, is the incredible endurance here of kinship bonds.
Yes.
Which I think I've not noticed much with faculty because
No.
of where faculty come from to come here.
Right.
But where I've really noticed it is with people who have been secretaries,
Right.
people I've gotten to know who work on the grounds crew or
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that is so important
Yeah.
to them
Yeah.
that they make a lot of time in a given week for mom and dad, grandma
Right.
and grandpa.
Right.
And as again you well know, a lot of these ties go back to Tennessee.
Right.
And to some degree Kentucky.
Certain towns
Yeah,
even.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Good old
yeah.
Fentress County, Tennessee.
Jamestown.
Exactly
Right.
right.
So I think that doesn't prove in any way that the Muncie community Ball State situation remains the same, but it tells you something, I think.
Well, I think Ball State has tried to spend a lot of time in the past decade or so proving to at least leaders in the community
Yeah.
that we do an awful lot.
Yeah, now, I would separate leaders of the community
Okay.
from the general population. I think there's I would suspect, a much stronger relationship between the Muncie community leadership and Ball State.
Which I think has always been true.
It's always been
Yeah.
true, but if anything, it's even perhaps stronger now. But I'm really referring to the general population when I say I don't think much has changed.
This has nothing to do with this interview, but as long as I've got you here as a semi-captain, I'll ask it anyway because I know you're interested in this. Do you think Ball State can succeed in Division I-A football?
Well, the past few years certainly aren't too promising. I had not realized, I hadn't thought about it, but Hoke had lost 7 straight games until Western. 4 last year and the first 3 this year. You know, of the 117 Division I-A teams, I think we were ranked 105th this year, maybe 107th or something like that. But then I think I was telling John Ginter that he was saying people don't give the MAC enough credit, you know, lamenting that.
Yeah.
I said, well, maybe so, John. But if you look at the rankings of the preseason rankings in football, I think 6 of the bottom 17 teams were MAC teams.
Yeah.
So we've got our Toledos and Miamis. And it's not a very long list. And then it's Northern now, and then it drops off pretty quickly.
Well, you think of, you know, I got in this a lot when I was out west this summer because of Montana and Montana State playing 1AA, where they think most schools like this ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened a year ago is what I call this incredible atypicality of the MAC football season.
Yeah, that
where
one
you had-
Saturday.
Yeah, where you had a fair number of teams that really had impressive records.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden the Miamis and Bowling
Right.
Greens, Toledo,
Marshall. Right.
Northern Illinois, that all of a sudden they were beating a lot of big guys.
Right.
But that's very atypical.
That's
It
atypical.
doesn't happen all the time. It's
Yeah.
kind of like
Now Ohio beat Kentucky Saturday,
Right.
but then
Right.
I guess Ohio must be better, and
Yeah.
Kentucky's probably not
Yeah.
too good.
Yeah.
So you know, it's a tough call. It's a very tough call.
Yeah, it is. Particularly because of where we're located. In Montana, you get a sense of it's okay, and nobody complains about being AA. The problem here is, unlike out west, you don't have anybody to play.
Mhm.
And so if you're going to go 1AA here, it would be viewed as an incredible badge of shame.
Oh, it would.
And so there's
Yeah.
really as much of a public relations factor
Yeah,
with this
yeah,
as
I
anything
think
else.
so. I think I would not advocate that Tulsa give up Division I-A, but I think it's a very tough job.
Yeah.
Brady Hoke's got a load on his shoulders, you know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Anything else you'd like to add? Any other final comments or reflections?
Well, now tell
for
me again
posterity?
what you're trying to do with this.
What I'm doing is a series of interviews, primarily with people who have retired since the mid-90s, because in the mid-90s, Tony and Bruce stopped doing their interviews for what became the History of Ball State. And so what I decided to do for a couple of years after I retired was to update the archive.
I see.
And to do these as tapes and transcripts from the tapes, which will end up in Bracken Archives for somebody in the year 2040 who decides to do volume 2 of Ball State history, that person or person will have a rich resource of people like you who have been here and have some sense of history, if you will, as to what this place has been like over the past several years.
I think it's extremely difficult to get a fix on it. Because I think Indiana, in many ways, and I think Ball State reflects it to a great degree, Indiana in many ways is a paradox. When I went down to the opening of the Indiana History Museum, I talked to, and his name has gotten away from me, he's the man who did. Okay, I should remember his name, but very famous. And there was a time, this was the dedication, and all these celebrities were around, and it was a time I had a chance to chat with him a little bit. So I asked him, because the president of the Indiana Historical Society had said that the assignment given the architect and the designer of the exhibits and what have you was to kind of create the spirit of Indiana, whatever that is, which I thought was a very interesting assignment. So I asked him, the exhibits guy, when you came to Indiana to try to kind of figure out what to do, did you come across the Indiana inferiority complex? And he paused for a moment and said, no, I really didn't. What I came across, rather, was an immense pride. Now, as strange as it seems, I think both of those are true. And I suspect that to some degree they're true of Ball State. Now, there may be, the inferiority complex may be largely gone. I don't know.
I'm not so sure it is.
Yeah.
I think in some areas it is, in some areas it
That's
isn't.
probably what it is. But certainly it was a very dominant factor for a long time. Yet on the other hand, there's a Hoosier pride. We think we're pretty good, and it's an interesting mix.
Yeah. It's almost, I see it as we're as good as most. But yet there's never been, in my view, a Hoosier view of being better than everybody.
No, not better than everybody else.
And I think when I lived in Michigan, and my son now lives in Madison, Wisconsin, and I spent a lot of time up there. That's funny. Those two states to the north, I think, in good times, in financial good times, economic good times in Wisconsin and Michigan, they're really out there spending money.
They're in high clover.
They are.
Right.
And I don't find that to be as true.
No. I remember once talking to a guy from California who said, the professor said, first they delayed upkeep and maintenance.
Right.
Then they just stopped it.
Yeah.
Well, we never delayed or stopped upkeep.
No.
So I would be an example. I took a certain pride. We're not all that bad, are we? At least we're taking care of the place.
Well, a silly example I'll give you, and again, this is based on my experiences recently in Montana. Think of all the years you were on the faculty and served as an administrator at Ball State. Same for me. Every single one of those years, we had some salary
Yeah, we had
increase.
some salary increase.
Now, these days, you try that out on people
Right.
from the Northwest,
Right.
the Pacific Coast.
Yeah, that'd be even
Southwest.
a better one than maintenance.
And they're not going to let these buildings crumble,
Mm-hmm.
and they're always going to have a salary increase, even though it may be modest.
Mm-hmm.
But it always happens.
And there's a journalism professor, I don't think he's doing it anymore, from Columbia who had retired and did an annual survey of retirement benefits. I want to tell you, Ball State stands at the head of the class.
Yeah. Well, apropos of this study, when I first became provost, I used to have coffee regularly with Bob Robbins, Ed Struther, Alan Huckleberry, and Dave Shepard, and their wives over at McDonald's on Saturday morning. And as you know, since you're familiar with those faculty members, they spent no little time telling me what I ought to be doing as provost of Ball State. But more importantly, and especially as their health began to fail, they were among those faculty who were at times very critical of the university during their tenure as faculty. Once they got to using retiree health benefits, all of a sudden this became one of the great institutions in the history of the Western world.
I don't think there's any question about it. So I think, I never really thought about it before, but and you couldn't take this too far, I suppose, but maybe in a pretty significant way, Ball State does represent Indiana. Probably, certainly more than IU, certainly more than Purdue. Maybe, I don't know about Indiana State.
Well, I think Ball State does. I mean, almost in a Middletown kind of way.
Right.
Because I think IU and Purdue have long ago decided that they're like a number of their brothers and sisters in the Big Ten, that they want to play on a national, if not a world, educational arena. And Ball State, I think, has still been very cognizant of its role as a service provider to the
Well, in
citizens of the
recognizing that the wherewithal is never going to be there to do it. I mean, we're realists.
Right.
It's just not going to happen.
Right.
Now, we can try to have our premier programs, and we can try to ratchet up the student body, and we'll do all those things. We're not going to be IU.
Right.
It's just not going to happen.
Well, I think that was one of the important aspects of John Worthen's long presidency here, because John realized that no matter what we did, we would never be able to outfight, if you will, IU and Purdue in the legislature.
Right.
And what we had to do was to carve out our own niche.
Right.
And I think we were pretty successful.
And I think
doing
we've,
that.
that's right. And I think that would be part of this positive attitude. I think that over time, and it, you know, how could you have expected it to be otherwise? Nothing's going to happen in a second. But over time, Ball State has plodded along, and it's kind of identified this niche.
Yeah, that's right.
And
well, and funny enough, to come back to one of the points we spoke about at some length, that's why I think, or that's one of the many reasons I think, why the creation of the College of Communication, Information, and Media was the right idea at the right time. I think having those disciplines in the bloated College of Sciences and Humanities, which was bloated only because of the way colleges were divided up when we became a university back in the mid-60s, and certain departments morphed into 5 departments. With that college, it made a real statement about one of the areas of expertise that the university really needed to have.
well, I remember very specifically when we divided into those colleges.
Sure.
And Engelhardt was adamant. We're going to be in there with the humanities. We're not going to be over the science guys and educate. No, we've got to be in sciences and humanities.
Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's
okay.
fine.
Well, thank you very much for helping me with my project. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.